Salutations and welcome, horse racing fans. I'm your host, Matthew DeSantis, and this is the Win Place Show, a podcast devoted to all aspects of horse racing and handicapping that is proudly part of the Amalfi Media Network. Today, we're going to get in the Thanksgiving spirit and preview some of the races taking place over the Thanksgiving weekend, and that is highlighted by the race at Churchill Downs, the Grade 1 Clark Stakes, taking place on Friday, November 26th, the day after Thanksgiving. So if you're in turkey coma, you just want to watch something good, the Clark Stakes is there for you. And since the Clark Stakes is the only graded stakes race on that card, I'm also just going to give you a sneak peek of some of my previews of the undercard races at the Clark. Just very quick, run through a couple of those just to give you a sense of how I handicap some other races. And if you're not familiar with my picks blog at amalfimedia.com, this can give you a little bit of insight into how I handicap some of the non-graded stakes races that might be on a card. Now, before we break it all down, just a quick reminder to follow, download, rate, review, and share the Win Play Show on the podcast platform of your choice, and subscribe to the Win Play Show on our YouTube channel. We really appreciate all of the positive comments we've gotten, the really nice recommendations and reviews. Everything's just been really wonderful, so thank you so very much. Even when we have some disagreements on our picks, it's always very cordial. It's always very nice. I enjoy talking to you and getting different points of view and hearing what other people think about these things. So it's great interacting with fans and fellow horse racing enthusiasts. Now, we're going to continue to have weekly previews, obviously, throughout the holiday season. We're also going to do race recaps with the latest news in horse racing and interviews with prominent figures across the industry. And I got a couple of those lined up coming up in December. Additionally, remember, we do have the blog that corresponds with each of these episodes where I give you my win, my place, and my show for the entire Churchill card on Friday. Now, that's not all for this week. On Wednesday, you will be getting another preview, and I will be joined by Sarah Albadwi of Outrun the Odds as we preview the Grade 3 Cumley and the Gio Stakes that are taking place at Aqueduct, which is also taking place on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. So that preview is coming out on Wednesday, and then I'll have my traditional Friday preview up on Friday morning, obviously, the day after Thanksgiving, for the huge Saturday at Del Mar, which is going to have the Grade 1 Hollywood Derby, the Grade 2 Seabiscuit Handicap, and the Grade 3 Jimmy Durante Stakes. There's also going to be a huge $20,000 stable duel contest that Saturday at Del Mar, and I'll have more information on that on Friday's preview. So listen, we got you covered the entire Thanksgiving holiday with this, with the Cumley and the Gio preview, as well as the Friday Del Mar preview. So listen, if you need a break from your in-laws for a couple of minutes, if you're stuck doing a lot of traveling, you don't have time to handicap the entire card, no worries. We got you covered. Finally, make sure to interact with us on Twitter or on YouTube to let me know what you think of the races and how you see them all breaking down, and share with your fellow horse racing fanatics on social media. Okay, well, let's dive into the races. And since, as I mentioned, there's only one graded stakes race at Churchill Downs on Friday, I thought I'd quickly handicap the three races preceding it, just to give you a little sneak peek of what I do on my picks blog each week in case you've not been over to amalfimedia.com to check it out. So let's start with the eighth race on the card. And this is a 7-furlong race. That's a $30,000 claiming race for 3-year-olds and up, and it's on dirt. Now, this is an interesting race because it's got a few horses that are really dropping down in class. Tuggle is the horse that is taking probably the most significant class drop, but this is a horse that is really trending in the wrong direction, has seen decreasing and declining Beyer speed figures. If you look at something like US Time Form, also declining speed figures there. And while historically Tuggle might have some of the best figures and speed fractions in the entire field, ultimately the last 3 or 4 times out, it has been really a shadow of its former self. So Tuggle's a horse that I'm kind of fading here. I'm not sure because I'm recording this on Monday evening. The odds have not yet been released, so I don't know in terms of where the morning line odds are going to be. Tuggle taking this huge glass drop, I wouldn't be shocked if Tuggle actually has some pretty low odds, so I would kind of stay away from this horse. I think this is a horse trending in the wrong direction. And just like I said, even going into a $30,000 claimer, I'm still skeptical, just particularly based upon the performance last time out. A horse that I think is interesting is Nip and Tuck. And this is a horse to keep an eye on because this is a horse that might not run in this race. Nip and Tuck is also entered to race on Thanksgiving Day. And so depending on whether or not Nip and Tuck runs on Thursday, it may or may not obviously run on Friday. If Nip and Tuck runs on Friday, I'll be interested because this is a horse that probably can get to the lead and get there pretty quickly. There's not a lot of other obvious speed in this field, interestingly enough. So even though Nip and Tuck is mostly on turf, if it runs in this race, which I'm skeptical it will, but if it does run in this race, we'll see. It should be worth noting that the weather in Churchill on Friday, because weather this time of year is always a little questionable, but weather on Friday, I should say, is going to be pretty nice. It'll be cold, but it'll be pretty nice. Now, that said, the day before on Thursday, it is calling for a lot of showers. So the dirt might just, we'll see. I don't know if it may be just muddy, might just be good, probably won't be fast. So we'll see how the dirt is in terms of the conditions. And like I said, some of these horses are transitioning between turf and dirt. So we'll see. The horses that I'm looking at, though, in terms of where I see my top three, Mists of Time is certainly one of those. This is a horse also taking a slight step down in class, had been running at the $50,000 claiming level, now coming down to the $30,000 claiming level. It's a horse that might have only won once, but hits the board a lot. And so this is a pretty safe bet if you're looking to build out horizontal tickets like exactas, trifectas. This is a pretty consistent horse and a horse that I would definitely include on a lot of those types of tickets. Also a horse that if you're doing a pick 3, pick 4, you probably have to throw this horse in because it's going to be a factor later on. Sol del Sur is another horse in this race that I like a little bit. Nice cutback in distance that should be really helpful. This is a horse that does seem to come up empty at a mile plus. Does have some, the last 2 times out have been nice. They've been solid efforts, but still a little over a mile. And a lot of times you're seeing this horse giving up ground that last 2 furlongs. So the cutback to 7 furlongs, I think, is actually going to work really nicely for this horse. So I do like that. And then the horse that I really like to win here is Notable Exception. And this is a horse that's also getting class release and is running at a better distance for this particular horse and has been working out really beautifully at Keeneland. So I think the combination of a distance cut, getting the right distance and some class relief and working out nicely at Keeneland. So the way I see this one playing out is I have Notable Exception to win. I have Sol del Sur to place. I have Mists of Time to show. So let's move to the 9th race on the card, which is a $62,000 optional claiming race. That is a 1 3/16 miles for 3-year-olds and up on the dirt. And this is another kind of interesting field. It's got some names that for those of us who, follow this pretty closely might be a little familiar. Some horses that have run in some pretty big races in the past. And there are some really intriguing horses. A horse like Goalie is particularly intriguing in this race because that's entirely a turf horse. Has never run on dirt. But there's some things that make it interesting. It's got plenty of dirt in its pedigree and has shown that its pedigree is pretty versatile in terms of running on both turf and dirt. Some of its siblings have had a lot of success doing that. And both up top and underneath, it's got nice dirt pedigree. So Goalie's a horse that might actually like the dirt. It's second time being trained by Diodoro, who is on fire at Churchill Downs. So that's something to keep in mind. That said, this is a little bit of a step up in distance. We're changing surfaces. We're making a lot of changes here for this horse. So that might be a little too much. It did get gelded back in February. Sometimes people like to play that angle. I don't know if I like Goalie enough to play those angles in this particular field, but just some information I wanted to pass along in case some of you might like playing those angles in this particular race. Huge Bigley. This is a horse that I think is kind of interesting. Made a transition from turf to dirt last time out and ran really well at this level, at this kind of $62,000 optional claiming. So I like that. And is also getting now a little bit, about a 16th of a mile, a cut back in distance, which I actually think will really help for this particular horse. That might seem like a very small amount, but I think it's going to have an impact. I actually saw this horse run at Colonial Downs on its final day on the turf. And it was much the best that day. It was a really impressive horse, really digs in down the stretch. And so I like this horse quite a bit in this race. Alegi is a Steve Asmussen horse. This is another horse that should really benefit from a slight cutback in distance. It's run well the last 3 times out. So you like to see this horse is kind of stacking up good performances one after another. I think that's a good thing. This horse does have a lot of class, does have some of that higher end speed that probably the rest of the field does not quite have. I mean, you look at Byers, you look at US Time Form. This is kind of the fastest horse in the field. Should set up nicely in terms of this the race. This is a horse that should be on the lead. And like I said, this race should set up pretty nicely for Alegi to do well there. And the horse that I'm going to take a little bit of a swing at is Patagonia. And I don't know what the odds are yet, but I'd imagine Patagonia is going to go off at a decent price. This is a horse that has not run since March 2020 and had been running really well prior to that, has had an incredibly long layoff. I just think it's worth taking a swing, see how this horse does. Jonathan Thomas has had some success with horses taking a long layoff. Jonathan Thomas is the trainer here. So this is a pretty wide open field. So like I said, I'm going to play Patagonia kind of underneath here. So the way I see this one playing out is Alegi up top to win, huge big lead to place, Patagonia to show. So in the 10th race, right before the Clark Stakes, this is the 10th race in the card. This is another pretty big allowance race, $127,000 allowance. That's a mile on dirt for 3-year-olds and up. And this one's a little bit more straightforward, in my opinion. There's a couple of horses that are pretty clearly, I think, a cut above. Milliken ran an absolutely monster race last time out. If he runs anywhere near that, again, he's going to win. You know that I like young horses that keep getting better. Milliken fits that profile. Distance, I don't think will be an issue at all based upon pedigree, based upon workouts. Speaking of workouts, those look spectacular. So I really like Milliken in this spot. Probably will be the morning line favorite, but you never know. There are some other nice horses in this field. Now, the 2 horses that I'm interested in are Flags Up and Angkor. And these are both horses that are every other race type horses. And that sounds like a silly thing to say, but a lot of horses are like that. I shouldn't say a lot, but there's a number of horses that are like that. Where every other race you see a really good effort, and then they throw in a clunker the next race. What's interesting is both of them are kind of every other race horses, and both of them had really good performances last time out, which makes you think this time is not going to be as good. I ultimately don't think both of them are going to misfire. It's rare to see that happen where you have 2 every other horses in a race and they both don't do well. Usually one of them flips the script a little bit. And so I'm going to lead toward Flags Up, being the horse that I think is actually going to run pretty well this time out. And part of it is because it's got a hot jockey. Rafa Barjano is running this really well. Plus, if you look inside the numbers, that every other race, it has some mitigating circumstances. Some of it has corresponded with stepping up into stakes races. Some of it has corresponded with a surface change. So I can excuse some of the every other race misfires because of those other circumstances. So I like Flags Up here quite a bit in this race. I think this is a good horse. A horse that I think is going to take on a lot of money is Injunction. It's a good horse coming off breaking its maiden. I'm worried about distance. That said, because looking back at some of the previous races, it's really faded at a mile or more. And so I'm worried about that. I just think Injunction might be a horse that gets caught or starts to lose ground at the end. Therefore, I really like playing Gentle Soul maybe underneath. This is a horse that I like that in terms of going back down on distance to taking that cutback. That's an angle I usually like to play is taking a cutback in distance. So I like Gentle Soul here underneath with David Cohen aboard to take that cutback. So in the 10th race, I'm playing Milliken to win, Flags Up to place, and Gentle Soul to show. All right. So enough of the preceding races in the undercard. Let's get to the big race and let's get to the Clark Stakes. And let's take a look at the field for the Clark Stakes, which is, of course, a 1.125 miles on dirt for 3-year-olds and up. This is an 8-horse field. And in post position number 1, we have the morning line favorite Midnight Bourbon, trained by Steve Asmussen, jockeyed by Joel Rosario, going off at 9-5. Then you have Night Ops, trained by Brad Cox and jockeyed by Florent Giroux. Dr. Post, trained by Todd Pletcher and jockeyed by Irad Ortiz Jr. Happy Saver, another Todd Pletcher horse, jockeyed by Tyler Gaffalione. Then King Fury, Ken McPeak horse, jockeyed by Brian Hernandez Jr. Chess Chief, trained by Dallas Stewart and jockeyed by Joe Talamo. And then Militarist, trained by Carlo Facareza and jockeyed by the aforementioned Rafael Bejarano. And then finally, Maxfield, trained by Brendan Walsh and jockeyed by Jose Ortiz. So let's talk about the Clark. And this is a very nice field. This is a very, very nice field, particularly for so shortly after the Breeders' Cup. And this is going to really start the adult career of Midnight Bourbon. Maxfield, of course, also targeted this race, dropped out of the Breeders' Cup Classic specifically to target this with the hopes of getting a Grade 1 victory before potentially retiring. We'll see. Although that might not happen because this is going to be a tough race for all involved. But let's start with the morning line favorite, Midnight Bourbon. Gets that inside post. I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of that, myself included. But that said, this race should set up really well for Midnight Bourbon outside of the inside post. The post draw is not great, but there's no other clear speed in this race. In terms of nobody's going to push Midnight Bourbon. You know, one of the things, if you look at that Pennsylvania Derby, Hot Rod Charlie was right there. If you look at the Preakness, Medina Spirit was right there. Midnight Bourbon's not going to have anybody really to contest him on the lead. He should be able to get to the lead pretty quickly. And this is a horse that can run a hot pace up front or can really slow things down up front. So it's a versatile horse and has done things both ways in the past. So I do like Midnight Bourbon here quite a bit. Like I said, setting a reasonable pace, has gone up against the absolute best 3-year-olds. Anybody who watched him go up against Essential Quality 2 races ago, incredibly impressive. Strong second place performance behind Hot Rod Charlie. And Hot Rod kind of went out really wide outside of that fourth turn and forced Midnight Bourbon to adjust course and go out even further. I don't think that really had much of an effect on the outcome, but it was one of those moments where just Hot Rod Charlie, God bless him, just can never seem to run a clean race. And so it's always something with that horse, who I also really like a lot, but just always something. The only issue with Midnight Bourbon is this horse likes running second a lot. You know, obviously second at the Preakness, second at the Travers, second at the Pennsylvania Derby. Horse runs second a lot, and that's a concern. Now you can make an argument, which I tend to make, that this horse just has run up against really, really strong competition, and it's not as if this horse has run down to its level of competition. If anything, this horse runs up to its level of competition. So I do think Midnight Bourbon's a very good horse that can win and has won in the past, obviously. He wouldn't be in this position if he hadn't. It also should be noted there's a jockey change. There's a jockey change in the Asmussen barn in general, because gone are a lot of the mounts for Ricardo Santana Jr., and in is Joel Rosario, who I have a lot of confidence in this race. He'll be aggressive. He'll get Midnight Bourbon out there up front. So I do like the way this race sets up for Midnight Bourbon in terms of really being the lone speed. You look at all the other horses in this field, they like sitting back. They like stalking, or they like going way far back in the field. So this should set up pretty well for Midnight Bourbon to kind of get the ideal trip, not expend too much energy in terms of being pressed for a lead most of the way around the track, should have plenty left. Distance should not be an issue. This is a horse that can go 1.25 miles without a problem, so 1.125 miles should not be an issue at all. Now let's talk about a couple of the other horses. Night Ops is a nice horse, but I think is a little out of its depths here. Would need to run probably its best race to hit the board. I will say struggles when it steps up in class. Last time out, you might be able to excuse just because he was running in the slop at the Fayette Stakes. That was just a rainy, miserable day. But still, even going back, looking at other races, Night Ops, kind of a cut below some of the other horses here. Let's talk about Dr. Post. A very good horse. But I'm worried about where he's going to be positioned because this is a horse that likes to really come from pretty far back. And when Midnight Bourbon is not pressed for the lead, Midnight Bourbon typically runs a pretty pedestrian to slow pace up front and is very strategic about not expending too much energy up front. This is not, a horse that I just talked about last week, Channel Cat. He's not, Midnight Bourbon is not even Hot Rod Charlie or Medina Spirit or Nick Sko, who will go to the lead and just run. He goes to the lead and then kind of slows things down, is very strategic about that. So Dr. Post, he's not going to have a lot of speed to run into. That's my fear here. And he's going to be pretty far back, I would imagine. He'll be close to the end of this field, maybe sitting in like the sixth position, 5, 6. I just am worried he's not going to have a ton of speed to run into. Also, he's a little bit of an every other race type of a horse where you look at speed fluctuation figures. This is scheduled to be kind of a down performance based upon a really strong effort at the third place at the Woodward last time out behind our collector in Maxfield. Listen, Irad Ortiz is riding him instead of Happy Saver. Irad has traditionally ridden Happy Saver, the other horse in Todd Pletcher's barn, quite regularly. It has ridden Dr. Post in the past, but is going back on Dr. Post. So, maybe Irad had his choice and decided to go to Dr. Post, which we've talked about before, can sometimes tell you something. But I'm just a little bit worried about the running style here and whether or not he's going to be too far back to make a push. And sometimes Irad can give some puzzling rides when that's the case. Now, I actually really like Happy Saver, who is going off at 9-2 and is kind of the third favorite. I think this is a horse where I don't think Happy Saver can win, but this is an incredibly consistent horse. And while he's not been quite as good in 2021 as he was in 2020, he's been right there, super competitive in grade 1 and grade 2s. Should be in a really nice position, I think, in this race. He should be right behind Midnight Bourbon, maybe right behind Maxfield, depending on where Maxfield's placed. But he should be sitting in that 2-3 slot and should really get the first jump at Midnight Bourbon coming around. I love Tyler Gaffleone. You know that. I think he's riding just so well at Churchill. He rode great at Keeneland. So he's riding really well this time of year. He is getting shipped in from the Northeast, as is Dr. Post. Sometimes I'm a little worried about that. Just you don't know how horses react to new dirt, new surfaces. Both he and Dr. Post have never run at Churchill, but we'll see. But I think Happy Saver's a really live horse and definitely a win contender here. I like that horse a lot. Now, a horse that I am not as high on that I know a lot of people are is King Fury. A lot of people really love the post position. I get that. A lot of people really love the combination of Ken McPeak and Brian Hernandez Jr. I get that too. Sometimes it comes down to the horse, though. And the horse, in this particular case, King Fury, seems to be a step below in terms of class, both in terms of the speed figures, you look at on the different surfaces, and just where he finishes. When he steps up in big-time graded stakes races, it doesn't usually work out well. Third place by 8+ lengths. Fifth place by 9 lengths. Oh, and that was at the Travers behind Midnight Bourbon. Got a second at the Grade 3 Ohio Derby, won the Grade 3 Lexington Derby. And I'm not counting a 10th place finish he had at the Saratoga Derby Invitational, which is where he was run on turf. But bottom line is at the Grade 3 level, you see some good things. Step up to Grade 2, Grade 1, you don't see as good of things. I admit, it's a nice post position. I think he should be positioned pretty well, probably in that 3, 4, 5 slot area. So should get a nice trip. I don't think he's got the speed. I don't think he's got the class to necessarily win here. If you're looking for some value to fill out a trifecta, maybe. But I like other horses more. I just am not the biggest believer in King Fury in this particular race. I think it's a good horse. I just think this is a really tough field for him to go up against. And I'm just not sure, again, with Midnight Bourbon's running style, how much it's really going to open things up to closers. Part of the reason you saw Rombauer be able to clean up the pace, clean up the pieces at the Preakness was because Midnight and Medina Spirit were really running fast paces in that race. You're probably not going to see nearly as fast a pace today, so I'm a little skeptical of deep closers and people coming in from too far back. Chess Chief and Militarist, I'll just say I don't think either of them are there. They're both going off at 30-1. Sometimes people like playing long bombs. I get it, but I just don't think this is the spot. If there was only maybe one or two horses that I think were good in this race, maybe you take a shot at a long shot, but there are 4 or 5 horses that I really like here. And so ultimately, I just don't think Chess Chief and Militarist are really going to duke it out. I don't think any of the horses here in this field are distance compromised either. So it's not like I expect horses to die down the stretch and for these two to somehow come and clean up the pieces. And so I just don't think either of these horses is necessarily in a great spot to hit the board or to add a lot of money to your tickets. So let's finish up with the horse on the far outside, the second favorite, Maxfield, who's going off at 2-1. By post time, this could end up being the favorite. We'll see how things play out. Obviously, very close between Midnight Bourbon at 9-5 and Maxfield at 2-1. This is a beautiful horse. This is just a beautiful horse. Has never finished off the board. 7 for 10 winning in his career. Has only won 2 of its last 5. Very respectable seconds behind Art Collector and Knicks Go. Obviously, those speak for themselves in terms of Breeders' Cup Classic quality horses. Distance should not be an issue, but that said, it doesn't win a ton at this distance. There's only 1 for 3 winning at this distance, finished third at 1.25 miles as well. Very comparable speed to Midnight Bourbon if you look at buyer speed figures. If you look at Timeform US speed figures, Midnight Bourbon is very clearly the fastest horse in this field. Should be getting a very nice trip, sitting in that second or third position with Happy Saver. Workouts look very good. And here's the last thing I'll say. This horse is perfect at Churchill Downs. 4 for 4. Has never lost in Kentucky. So there's a lot to like there with Maxfield. It gets that outside post position. In an 8-horse field, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Should be able to use that tactical speed to kind of drop into, like I said, that 2-3, at worst 4 spot, and should get a pretty early jump on Midnight Bourbon because of that. This is a very tough race to call, and I really am struggling with my top 2. But if you've been following me on Twitter at Failed to Menace, you know that for the last several months, I've been saying that I think Midnight Bourbon's 4-year-old campaign is going to be one of the best in the country. I absolutely love this horse. I think this horse has guts. I think this horse digs in. I think this horse can go. I think this horse finally has a field where he's not going to get pushed and cooked for an early speed. And when anybody comes to challenge him, he's going to have plenty left in the tank to win. So therefore, it might be chalky. But listen, up top to win, I have Midnight Bourbon. To place, I have Maxfield. To show, I have Happy Saver. I really love Happy Saver a lot. I could see that horse running second. Maybe there's a scenario where I could even see Happy Saver winning. I really, really like this horse. I'm not as high on King Fury as others. I think Dr. Post might be a little compromised by the fact that he won't have distance to speed to run into. So I do like the 3 favorites to finish 1, 2, 3. I know that's chalky and not particularly popular, but the way this race plays out, it just plays out very nicely, I think, for the 3 favorites. Much as the race last weekend, the Chaluki Stakes at Churchill, played out very nicely for the top 3 favorites in obligatory, Matera, and Miss Bigley. That's exactly how we saw that race finish, and I think we might see something similar here. All right, well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my preview of the Clark and some of the undercard races at Churchill on Friday, and the Friday after Thanksgiving. And make sure to head over to amalfimedia.com, linked right below the video and in the episode notes, where you can get my picks for the entire Friday card at Churchill. Additionally, as I mentioned up top, I have a lot of previews coming for you this week. On Wednesday, I'll have a preview of the Grade 3 Cumley Stakes and Gio Ponte Stakes at Aqueduct, where I'll be joined by Sarah Albadwi of Outrun the Odds. Then on Friday, I'll have a preview of the huge Saturday at Del Mar featuring the Grade 1 Hollywood Derby, the Grade 2 Seabiscuit Handicap, and the Grade 3 Jimmy Durante Stakes. You'll be able to get my picks for all of those races, for those tracks, on those days at amalfimedia.com. Finally, just a reminder to follow, download, rate, and review the Win Play Show on the podcast platform of your choice, and subscribe to the Win Play Show on YouTube, in addition to following me on Twitter at the handle @Failed to Menace for all the great horse racing content you need to get you ready for the 2022 season. Until next time, friends, I'm Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great day, and listen, a very safe and happy Thanksgiving season with you and your family. Thank you for all the support. I really do hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and may it be a prosperous Thanksgiving at the track, because guess what, folks? It's now post time.